The human will is a forge, and within that fire, the mind is hammered into shape. We often celebrate the spectacular victory, the moment of triumph that captures the world's attention. But the true story lies not in the finish line, but in the grueling, solitary distance before it. This is the realm of the mind that refuses to quit. It is not a mystical gift, it is a meticulously constructed defense system against surrender. It is a psychological infrastructure built on principles often overlooked by those who seek quick fixes. This mindset is the differentiator, the silent engine that powers sustained, high-level performance across every human endeavor, from the world of elite athletics to the quiet struggle of the entrepreneur or the scientist locked in a decade-long research pursuit. The world is littered with brilliant minds that faltered not because of a lack of talent, but because their mental architecture was too fragile to withstand the inevitable seismic pressures of reality. We are drawn to tales of natural genius, yet history's most indelible figures are often those who simply endured longer, who found a way to keep moving when logic dictated they should stop. This is the central enigma. How do some individuals access a reserve of tenacity that seems unavailable to others? How is the switch from I can't to I must flipped and then permanently secured? We begin our investigation by stripping away the mythology and looking at the core neurological and behavioral patterns. We will explore the lives of those who have mastered this art, examining the specific inflection points where they chose resilience over retreat. Every life contains a crucible moment, a high-stakes test that threatens to break the spirit. The mind that refuses to quit treats that moment not as an end, but as a critical, necessary data point. It is a system that learns to fail forward, where pain is simply information and setbacks are merely a calibration of effort. The journey to building this mind is arduous, but the blueprints are accessible, waiting to be studied and implemented. Our exploration is founded on the premise that mental toughness is a skill, not a trait. It is a series of interconnected, trainable habits that rewire the brain's default response to adversity. To understand this, we must first establish the difference between grit, which is passion and perseverance for long-term goals, and the immediate, tactical refusal to quit in a moment of crisis. We will be profiling three distinct subjects who embody this non-negotiable tenacity, each from a radically different domain, proving the universality of the principle. Our first subject is an ultra-endurance athlete, someone who voluntarily subjects their body and mind to conditions of extreme deprivation and pain. Their journey provides a clear, measurable window into the brain's pain tolerance mechanisms and its capacity for self-regulation under duress. The second subject is a successful tech founder who faced multiple near-fatal business failures before achieving a breakthrough. Their story illustrates the psychological fortitude required to withstand social pressure, financial collapse, and the profound emotional toll of repeated public setbacks. Finally, our third subject is a deep-sea salvage diver, whose profession demands an unwavering commitment to procedure and a ruthless suppression of panic in life-threatening environments. These three case studies will serve as our primary reference points, providing a three-dimensional view of the subject matter. Their narratives, though diverse, share a common architecture, a profound rejection of the default biological impulse to seek comfort and safety at the first sign of struggle. We will examine the specific, repeatable actions they take when the urge to quit is at its absolute peak. This is where the stage is set, in the internal battleground between the limbic system, which screams for retreat, and the prefrontal cortex, which executes the strategy of persistence. This refusal to quit is a deliberate, conscious act of psychological redirection, a learned discipline that transforms temporary failure into necessary feedback. The core mystery is why failure is so paralyzing for the majority. Biologically, the impulse to quit is a protective mechanism, an evolutionary algorithm designed to conserve energy and avoid injury. When faced with an insurmountable challenge, the mind's alarm system, the amygdala, fires an overwhelming signal of fear and futility. This leads to the release of stress hormones, which hijack cognitive function and cloud judgment, making retreat feel like the only rational choice. This is the initial problem we must solve: how to interrupt and override a deeply ingrained survival mechanism. For many, the first major setback is an unrecoverable event. The pain of the loss, the embarrassment, or the sheer exhaustion is interpreted by the brain as proof that the goal was impossible, leading to a permanent re-evaluation of personal limits. Quitting, in this light, is framed as prudence, as accepting reality. But the mind that refuses to quit operates under a different set of rules. It has somehow recoded the definition of prudence. It has learned to distinguish between danger, a threat to life, and discomfort, a threat to ego or short-term comfort. The core mystery, therefore, is rooted in the individual's relationship with discomfort. We see this manifested in the subjects we profile. The ultra-runner's legs are burning, yet they run another mile. The founder's bank account is empty, yet they make one more call. The diver's equipment fails, yet they follow the emergency protocol with unnerving calm. In each instance, the individual is experiencing the biological signal to quit, but their mental programming allows them to treat that signal as a suggestion, not a command. The problem isn't the challenge itself, the problem is the mind's default interpretation of the struggle. To build a mind that refuses to quit, we must fundamentally alter this interpretive framework, shifting from a mindset of self-preservation to one of strategic endurance. The solution lies in creating a psychological barrier between the emotional reaction to adversity and the subsequent behavioral response. The first major clue in deconstructing the non-quitting mind lies in the concept of identity layering. It's a crucial discovery that separates the resilient from the fragile. Most people tie their self-worth directly to the outcome of a single endeavor. If the business fails, they are a failure. If the race is lost, they are a loser. This brittle, monolithic identity collapses under pressure. The subject who refuses to quit, however, possesses a more layered identity, where who I am is separated from what I am doing. For our ultra-runner, completing the race is a goal, but their identity is built upon the process. I am a person who trains consistently. The failure of one race does not negate their identity as a disciplined, enduring athlete. For the tech founder, the company's collapse is a temporary financial and logistical setback, but it does not shatter their core self-concept as a strategic problem solver who learns rapidly. This layering provides a critical psychological buffer. It means that failure is externalized, it is something that happened to the project, not something that defines the person. This crucial discovery reframes failure as a temporary condition, not a permanent label. We found evidence of this in early journals and interviews with our subjects. Before their success, they consciously adopted and rehearsed new self-descriptions. They actively sought out evidence that supported their desired identity: the early morning workout, the extra hour of coding, the meticulous equipment check. These small, consistent actions served as the foundation for the non-quitting mind. By focusing on the process and the identity forged by that process, the ultimate outcome becomes less of an existential threat. The moment of crisis is then met not with the panic of a collapsing identity, but with the steady response of an established system. The mind refuses to quit because quitting would be a violation of its deeply held, foundational self-concept. The individual is not performing to get results, they are performing because it is who they are. To fully appreciate the mind that refuses to quit, we must understand its developmental origins. This mindset is rarely an accident, it is a learned response, often forged in the fires of early, self-imposed challenges. Our deep dive into the subject's past reveals a consistent pattern, a history of voluntarily engaging in difficult activities where the outcome was uncertain and the comfort level was low. This is the context for its creation. It was not always grand, dramatic struggles. For one subject, it began with mastering a complex, obscure instrument in childhood, an activity that demanded hours of frustrating, unrewarding practice. For another, it was holding down a grueling, low-wage job while simultaneously pursuing a degree, managing chronic exhaustion and financial stress. These early, low-stakes struggles served as training simulations for high-stakes resilience. They taught the nervous system how to process sustained discomfort without triggering a full-scale panic response. This history creates a powerful context. When a major challenge arises, the mind has a wealth of internal data that proves, empirically, that it can handle this level of pressure. The brain doesn't have to guess, it can recall 1,000 smaller victories where perseverance paid off. This is the engine of self-efficacy, the belief in one's capacity to execute behaviors necessary to produce specific performance attainments. It is a belief system built brick by brick, not downloaded instantly. Furthermore, the early context reveals the critical role of a non-negotiable minimum. Our subjects established baseline standards for themselves that were independent of external validation. They decided what effort was required, and they committed to it, regardless of the immediate reward. This pre-commitment shields the individual from the emotional volatility of the moment. When the runner is tired, the pre-commitment dictates the next step. When the founder is demoralized, the pre-commitment dictates the next action. This deeply rooted context of past endurance and a non-negotiable standard is the true origin of the refusal to quit. It transforms the act of enduring from a battle of will into the simple execution of a prior, rational decision. The field of resilience research is often split between two conflicting theories, the hardiness model and the growth mindset. The hardiness model suggests that key personality traits, commitment, control, and challenge, are the primary factors. The growth mindset, championed by Dr. Carol Dweck, posits that the belief in one's ability to develop through effort, as opposed to fixed talent, is the core driver. Our investigation suggests a synthesis of both, particularly as the stakes escalate. When the pressure mounts, when the ultrarunner faces organ damage, or the tech founder stares at insolvency, or the diver's oxygen gauge drops, the theoretical debate dissolves into a practical, moment-to-moment psychological battle. The escalating stakes force a collision between these theories. The inherent challenge component of hardiness becomes meaningless without the growth mindset belief that the individual can adapt to meet that challenge. Conversely, simply believing in growth is insufficient without the commitment and internal control mechanisms of hardiness. The refusal to quit, therefore, is the operational synthesis of these ideas. It is the commitment to a process, hardiness, coupled with the belief that the current process, even if failing, will lead to a better, more successful process in the future, growth mindset. This is evident in how our subjects process failure under extreme pressure. They don't just bounce back, they systematically extract lessons, immediately updating their approach. For instance, the founder's initial attempt to secure funding failed. The hardiness component kept them committed to the overall goal. The growth mindset component immediately caused them to scrutinize their pitch deck, their presentation style, and their target investor profile. They didn't quit, but they fundamentally changed their strategy. The stakes escalate not just externally, the deadline approaching, the physical limits being reached, but internally, as the cost of continuing rises dramatically. This continuous, immediate strategic adaptation, fueled by a commitment to the process and a belief in future capability, is what transforms the decision to endure into a dynamic, intelligent refusal to quit. It is not stubbornness, it is highly adaptable persistence. Every great narrative, and every truly tenacious life, has a point of no return. This is the psychological commitment, often made silently and unilaterally, that removes quitting as an acceptable option, regardless of the future cost. It is a preemptive surrender to the goal, a burning of the ships that makes retreat logistically and emotionally impossible. This stage is reached not in a burst of reckless adrenaline, but in a moment of cold, sober calculation. For our ultrarunner, the point of no return often happens before the race even begins: the public declaration of their goal, the financial investment in the travel and equipment, and the irreversible physical toll of a year of training. The commitment itself becomes a tether. To quit is not merely to fail a task, but to invalidate an entire past year of effort and to suffer a profound loss of self-respect. The cost of quitting is deliberately made higher than the cost of continuing. Our tech founder reached their point of no return when they leveraged every personal asset, selling their home, borrowing from family, not out of desperation, but as a calculated risk management strategy. The financial stakes were so high that working harder, working smarter, and enduring longer became the only viable path to survival, let alone success. This is a critical psychological maneuver, framing the continuation of effort as the lesser of two pains. The mind, programmed to avoid pain, is thus strategically channeled toward the greater reward, the successful outcome that eliminates the extreme, self-imposed cost of failure. The refusal to quit is solidified by this initial, high-stakes agreement with oneself. It transforms perseverance from a continuous, depleting battle against the self into a simple, non-optional execution of a contract. Once the point of no return is passed, the question is no longer if they will continue, but how they will continue. The debate is closed, and the energy previously wasted on internal deliberation is redirected entirely toward forward motion. At the midpoint of any great struggle, a crucial revelation often occurs, a psychological twist that shifts the focus from external success to internal mastery. The halfway revelation is this: the goal is no longer about the prize at the end, it is about the person the struggle is forcing you to become. Our subjects consistently report a transformation at the exact moment their effort should have yielded, but did not. For the ultrarunner, it might be mile 150 of a 200-mile race, when the hallucination begins and the logical mind completely breaks down. In that moment of total surrender to the physical process, they realize the race is no longer a physical challenge, but a meditation on suffering. The true reward is the profound stillness and clarity found within the exhaustion. For the tech founder, the midpoint twist came when a major investor backed out, forcing them to completely rebuild their business model overnight. The revelation was not about the market or the product, but about the team's capacity for crisis response. They discovered a core strength, a ruthless efficiency, and unbreakable trust that they didn't know they possessed. The true value was not the investment, but the forced realization of their organizational and personal capabilities. This midpoint twist is where the mindset truly refuses to quit. It is the moment the external pressure is internalized, becoming a self-improvement engine. The individual realizes that even if they fail to achieve the original goal, the acquired skills, the deepened self-knowledge, and the forged character are themselves an unbeatable prize. This revelation inoculates the mind against the fear of failure. If the process itself is the reward, then the outcome only affects the external metrics, not the internal development. The mind, liberated from the tyranny of results, can now commit fully and fearlessly to the execution of the task, knowing that the highest value has already been secured through the act of enduring. New evidence from neuroscience is beginning to map the psychological impact of sustained, non-quitting effort directly to structural changes in the brain. The deliberate act of pushing past the mental quit signal appears to strengthen the neural pathways between the prefrontal cortex, the center of rational decision-making, and the parts of the brain that process fear and pain. This new evidence suggests a literal retuning of the mind's alarm system. The constant, repetitive exposure to self-imposed stress, without the accompanying act of retreat, desensitizes the brain to the signal of discomfort. The psychological impact is profound. The once overwhelming sensations of fatigue, fear, or frustration are downregulated, shifting from a red alert status to a manageable yellow or even green. This is not a suppression of feeling, but a recategorization of the input. For the salvage diver, repeated, successful adherence to emergency protocols under deep-sea pressure rewires the brain to treat an equipment failure not as a source of panic, but as a prompt for the next step in a procedure. The cognitive process remains intact, unclouded by emotional flooding. We see the same pattern in the founder, whose psychological reaction to a catastrophic market shift is not despair, but immediate, dispassionate analysis. Their mind has been trained to treat high-stakes chaos as a data problem to be solved, not an emotional trauma to be experienced. The development of this kind of resilience is not about becoming emotionless, it is about achieving emotional agility, the ability to recognize and accept difficult feelings without letting them dictate behavior. The refusal to quit, therefore, has a cyclical, compounding effect. Each time the mind chooses persistence, it provides the neural system with a positive reinforcement loop, strengthening the rational control centers and weakening the emotional triggers for retreat. The more one refuses to quit, the easier the refusal becomes, until it is the default, automatic setting of the mind. The truth that the non-quitting mind reveals, that human potential is far greater than widely accepted psychological limits, is often met with attempts to suppress it, both externally and internally. Externally, the truth is suppressed by a culture that prefers the myth of genius to the reality of grueling, sustained effort. It is easier to dismiss the ultra-runner's feat as an act of insanity than to confront the implication that one's own limits are self-imposed. It is simpler to attribute the founder's success to luck or timing than to accept the sheer volume of failure they endured. This societal suppression keeps the mental blueprints for tenacity hidden behind a veil of exceptionalism. Internally, the truth is suppressed by the mind itself. The brain's inherent aversion to pain mounts a continuous campaign to rationalize quitting. This is the moment of maximum danger, the self-talk that attempts to convince the individual that they have done enough, that the risk is too high, or that the goal is not worth it. This internal suppression mechanism is often subtle, cloaking the impulse to quit in the language of self-care or common sense. The mind will attempt to protect its established comfort zone at all costs. The mind that refuses to quit must have an equally strong, counter-narrative system in place. They preemptively identify the lies the internal voice will tell and prepare rational, evidence-based counter-arguments. When the pain says stop, the mind replies, "This is expected pain, and I have endured worse on Tuesday's training run." The true act of perseverance is not the physical effort, but the ruthless suppression of the mind's rationalizations for retreat. Our subjects learn to view these internal arguments as the final, desperate struggle of their former, fragile selves. The refusal to quit becomes an internal, intellectual debate won by a prior, more disciplined version of themselves. The final phase of building this resilient mind involves the pursuit of the edge and the confrontation with ultimate capacity. This is the stage where the individual deliberately seeks out challenges that test the limits of the mental infrastructure they have built. It is a necessary confrontation to validate the new coding. For the ultrarunner, this means entering a race that pushes them beyond their known physical limits, seeking the point where the body's systems begin to fail and the mind must take over completely. This is the moment of pure will. For the founder, the confrontation involves making a high-stakes, all-or-nothing presentation to secure the deal that will either save or sink the company. The pursuit is not merely for success, but for the validation of their ability to perform under the highest conceivable pressure. The true test of a non-quitting mind is not when things are going well, but in the white-hot intensity of the inevitable breakdown. The confrontation is met with a specific, learned response, a narrowing of focus. When the pressure is maximum, the mind does not attempt to solve the whole problem. It retreats to the smallest possible unit of action. The runner focuses only on the next step. The diver focuses only on the next value on the gauge. The founder focuses only on the next sentence in the pitch. This narrowing of the cognitive field prevents the overwhelming nature of the total crisis from paralyzing the system. The pursuit of this confrontational experience creates a kind of psychological scar tissue, a memory of successful crisis management that becomes an unbreakable asset. Each confrontation survived reinforces the identity, making the next refusal to quit easier, more automatic, and more powerful. The mind is pursuing not an outcome, but a permanent upgrade to its operating system. As the journey progresses, the final pieces of the non-quitting mind fall into place, coalescing into a coherent, self-sustaining psychological system. This system is defined by three interlocking components: the detachment from outcome, the celebration of effort, and the protocol for recovery. The detachment from outcome is the ultimate expression of the layered identity, Section 4. It is the final realization that the work itself is the reward, freeing the mind from the paralyzing fear of failure that is tied to results. This doesn't mean a lack of ambition, but a redirection of ambition from external metrics to internal standards. The mind is free to pursue the goal with maximal effort because it has already secured its self-worth. The celebration of effort is the counter-narrative to internal suppression, Section 10. The individual deliberately and systematically reinforces the behavior of persistence. They do not wait for the finish line to acknowledge their discipline. Every difficult, non-negotiable action, the early training session, the difficult conversation, the tedious revision, is mentally logged as a small victory. This provides continuous, immediate psychological fuel. Finally, the protocol for recovery ensures the system is sustainable. The mind that refuses to quit understands that perseverance is not a continuous, unbroken chain of maximum effort. It is a calculated oscillation between high-effort exertion and strategic, guilt-free rest. The refusal to quit is as much about the discipline to rest as it is about the discipline to work. The recovery protocol prevents burnout, which is the ultimate form of forced quitting. When these three pieces, detachment, celebration, and protocol, snap into alignment, the mind achieves a state of self-regulating tenacity. The refusal to quit is no longer a draining act of sheer will, but the smooth, efficient operation of a finely tuned, highly intelligent system. The primary conclusion is that the mind that refuses to quit is fundamentally a mind that has mastered emotional energy management and goal hierarchy. The truth revealed is simple, yet revolutionary. Tenacity is not about resisting the urge to quit, it is about retasking the emotional energy generated by that urge. When the mind generates the intense, fight or flight energy associated with fear, pain, or frustration, the untrained mind uses that energy to retreat. The non-quitting mind, through learned discipline, channels that high-intensity emotional fuel directly into the next required action. The fear of failure is transformed into the focus on execution. The pain of exhaustion is converted into the power for the next step. This is the core engine of their endurance. Furthermore, they operate on a clear, non-negotiable goal hierarchy. The primary goal is never the external prize, the gold medal, the IPO. The primary goal is always the maintenance of the identity and the execution of the process. The secondary goal is the external prize. When the secondary goal is threatened, the individual is not shaken, because the primary goal, their identity as a relentless, focused individual, remains intact as long as they continue the process. This hierarchy shields them from the existential threat of setback. The mind refuses to quit because, in its structured internal reality, quitting would be a failure of the primary goal, a violation of the self, which is an infinitely worse outcome than failing to achieve the secondary, external goal. This is the ultimate, non-negotiable truth. The mind is built to preserve itself. The resilient mind simply redefines self-preservation as the preservation of the tenacious identity, making persistence the most logical, self-serving, and rational choice available. This reframing is the ultimate psychological breakthrough. The aftermath of successfully building a mind that refuses to quit extends far beyond the initial area of struggle. The legacy of this psychological infrastructure is its universal applicability. The mental tools forged in the heat of a marathon or a business failure are immediately transferable to every other domain of life, relationships, health, learning, and personal crisis. The individual no longer faces a problem, they face a process violation or a strategic inflection point, terms that demand a rational, systematic response rather than an emotional one. This mind creates a legacy of action, not reaction. It is a continuous self-reinforcing loop that builds momentum over a lifetime. In modern times, the principles of the non-quitting mind have found new and urgent relevance. The current environment of constant digital distraction, instant gratification, and continuous partial attention poses an unprecedented challenge to sustained effort. Tenacity is now a competitive advantage not just against external rivals, but against the very architecture of modern life, which is designed to fragment focus and reward superficial engagement. Building a mind that refuses to quit is now a necessary act of psychological self-defense against the erosion of deep work capacity. Furthermore, the principles tie directly into modern pedagogical and corporate training models. Institutions are beginning to focus less on teaching content and more on teaching tenacity, the ability to face complexity, iterate rapidly, and withstand the inevitable failures of innovation. The legacy of our subjects is not just their achievement, but the proven, repeatable method for achieving it. They are the living blueprints for a psychological operating system that is fundamentally resistant to the forces of entropy, distraction, and despair. Their commitment to the process now informs best practices across fields, proving that the greatest human variable is not talent, but the structural integrity of one's will.